Hello, Tri-Deltas, and thank you for joining us for another Lead Now conversation. I am Mindy Tucker. I'm Tri-Delta's VP of Marketing and Communications, and so glad to be able to lead these conversations that we're having as part of our Lead Now action plan, which is Tri-Delta's work to create a more inclusive and equitable member experience for our Black, Indigenous, and Sisters of Color. At the forefront of this work is Tri-Delta's collegiate chapters and members who are really bringing tremendous passion and energy to our DEI efforts. And so I'm really excited today to have Lauren Whitman join me. She is a rising senior from our Upsilon chapter at the University of Delaware. She recently served as VP of chapter programming in our chapter there, and is currently the VP of community enrichment for the Delaware Panhellenic. Lauren had a chance to share some of her DEI work with us at Collegiate Leadership Conference, CLC, in March as part of our Delta demos. And we are so excited to bring that today for everybody to see, not just the people who came to CLC. So Lauren, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
This is really great. I'm so impressed that you have sort of personally jumped into your chapter. You took the initiative to create some DEI training and some programs and have really driven this in the chapter there at Delaware. What is the spark that sort of started this? What's the story behind your passion for this?
Yeah, so I've always been someone who's really passionate about change and equity and really doing what's best for everyone and creating this really good environment for everyone. But being that I am a white woman and I fully acknowledge my privilege in that sense, never sort of realized how bad things were and like where this was stemming from until I was really fueled by passion for this after the murder of George Floyd. And as I continued to do this work, police brutality and other forms of racial injustice really just kept getting worse. And the voices of BLM really just started getting louder. And I was like, okay, I was so surprised and angry to realize that we not only didn't have anything in place like DEI related as Tri-Deltas, but also as like college women in general, especially for myself and my fellow white women who aren't necessarily connected to this in some way. I was just so angry and like so passionate about change. So I said, let's just dive into it and let's do something.
So as we talk, in time, it's the end of May, and we've just now hit the 1-year mark for the murder of George Floyd. I'm interested to hear you talk about what has changed in your chapter, how you feel like things have changed over the last year.
Yeah, so I think the biggest change and the thing that I am most proud of is that so after I created this initiative, this interactive DEI workshop, I started our DEI committee as well, which is now part of our bylaws. So it is in our bylaws now that we have to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which I think is so amazing because I can really see this change being not just like a fad and something that happens now, but it's something that's going to stay. Right. And other than that, I mean, it's not like I crafted the entire DEI movement. Like I can't take credit for that, but I think that it has really, if anything, just opened the communication in my chapter and really created a space for my chapter women to feel comfortable having these conversations and also being okay with saying like, listen, I don't know what this means or I don't know what to do with this, and being okay to like ask those questions and learn about it.
I know one of the things you've talked about is making sure that the work that you're doing is personal and relatable. I think that kind of goes into that. How do you make sure it is that with your training and the programming you're doing? How do you make sure it's personal and relatable?
Yeah, so when I first started this training, it was right towards like the beginning-ish of COVID. So we were already getting used to everything online. So it was sort of like this perfect time to build like personal connection into an online format. So with my PowerPoint like workshop I created, I incorporated video recordings of myself that automatically played throughout the workshop so that you could see me. It was like you and I were having a full conversation, which almost worked a little better than doing it in a lecture hall where we may have had chapter or in a common space where I was sort of talking at a huge group of people. So it really felt like it was one-on-one with that, but also in terms of personal and like relatable, in our DEI committee, like everyone has a voice and everyone is there to talk. And I think that being able to share these connections and learn from our members of color and our Indigenous members and anyone who wants that opportunity, it makes it personal because you learn from sisters instead of maybe someone who may seem so high above you and is intimidating.
Yeah, I think that relatable piece is so important too. We had a staff training at Tri-Delta on identity, and our team that we're working on our audit culture shift led it. And they started out by letting us all think about what it was like to be left-handed and right-handed. It was something so relatable to everybody, and whether or not you've had to make accommodations. And it was just such a great way to sort of enter into the conversation because it gathered everybody in a place where they could relate to it. So I think that piece is so important. I'm glad to hear that's a core concept for you as you move into this. So we have all found DEI work is a journey, and everybody's kind of at a different place on the journey. And I was really interested to learn that one of the concepts you guys are embracing is this self-reflection or self-assessment that you do before and after the training. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and let our listeners kind of know what that is and how it works.
Yeah, I would love to. So I think to think about self-reflection, it's really important to think about what it is. So when you think of assessment, you think of school and these grades and like really feedback that can sort of be detrimental and really hurt you. And it's really hard to take constructive criticism. But when you're taking this criticism from yourself, I think it really helps in a different way. So when we use self-reflection, it's so important no matter what you're doing in life, whether it's DEI related or not. So I found it really important through DEI because I'm really aware that like what I learned through this, everyone is on a very different level. And maybe someone knows so much about DEI and really does incorporate it into their life every day, but they don't stop to consider the fact that they do that and to give themselves a pat on the back about it and whatever it might be. And so with everyone on a different level, I wanted to use this self-reflection so that people could sort of center themselves in what they wanted to see and what they sort of know before they started, because it's almost like goal setting in that point. And there's something magical about putting something on paper, because when you write it down, you can visibly see what you're doing. You can visibly see what you started with and visibly see what you ended. So I started with self-reflection in the beginning, where it was a lot of like, have you ever done this? Or do you find yourself doing this? Or what do you know about this topic? And then presented the entire workshop. And throughout the workshop, I had a lot of interactive pieces like the implicit bias test, where our women could learn more about where this actually is coming from and sort of reflect just in their mind throughout. At the end, I had another written down visual reflection in the form of a Google form where women could say, okay, do I feel any different about this? How do I think I'm going to benefit from this in the future? And what do I want to see? So the self-reflection was really great for women to jump into this knowing what they had sort of like on them already. But then when they leave, were they disappointed they didn't get something out of this? Were they really excited that they got something? Do they want to see more? Because as it's so important for these chapter women I was putting it together for to reflect on themselves, it's important for me because yes, I created this workshop, but this isn't where my work stops, and it is not going to stop here. And so for me, like, I need to understand what my chapter needed to see so that I could create committee programming and like what I was going to do. And in that sense, all grow as a whole.
I think I read something also that if you go through a course and you don't think at the end about like, what am I going to do with this information? It's easy to forget everything that you learned in a class, a program. So I loved the idea that at the end, everybody stops and says, okay, what am I going to do with this information that I just learned as part of that reflection? So I loved seeing that. How have you seen that impact your sisters? What's the actual impact of those reflections on your sisters?
Yeah, and I think it manifests so differently in every single person. So some of it is definitely way more like internal in some women than others. But I've had a ton of people say to me, Lauren, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I'm going to use this. I had one person say to me after they were reading about microaggressions, because that was one of my topics, that they saw something happen in a person, like where they're at like the mall or something, and they saw something happen and they were like, I actually knew what to do. And I actually visibly saw this as a problem. And I think even that just baby step is so important. And then in terms of programming after the self-assessment, I shared this information. It was all anonymous. So you filled out a Google form and it went to me, but it was completely anonymous. So I didn't know who it was, made it a little more comfortable. I shared this with the chapter when we got back in the fall, and I was like, this is what you learned and this is what you want to see, and I want to help you. Because I'm not programming for me. I'm programming for everyone else. Because if I just program for me, I'm the only one that's going to benefit, and that's not doing anything. So I took I actually took what they wanted to see and I created programming. We have every week at chapter now, we have a DEI presentation led by one of our committee members. Our committee is now headed by our VP CR. So she's doing a fabulous job with that. And we have some co-chairs who were women of color. So it really provided this new insight. So I think in general, we were able to learn so much based on a single reflection.
I love it. That's good work. So one of the concepts that you really push, and that's part of the training that I know a lot about because my kids go to a social emotional school and we talk about growth mindset all the time, is this concept of growth and approaching things from a growth mindset. And can you talk a little bit about that and why you think it's so important on the DEI journey?
Yes, I love that question because I love growth mindset. And I think growth mindset is so important in so many aspects of our lives. But you're right, especially when we're talking about new topics and welcoming change and things that may be a little uncomfortable, such as DEI and something so intense as this. So I think that, so there are two types of mindsets. There is at least in this like holistic basic level that we're sort of talking about right now. So you have a growth mindset and your fixed mindset. So your fixed mindset, sometimes known as open and closed, but I think growth and fixed are a little cooler, a little more sophisticated. So basically your mindset is like this belief of how much we can learn and how much we can sort of improve moving forward. And so your fixed mindset is this sort of like our basic qualities and everything we know are fixed, not able to be changed. We've sort of reached this max capacity, don't welcome change. Where on the other hand, your growth mindset is you have this ability to learn more and become better through different experiences you have, through persevering, etc. So in terms of DEI, like, is always changing, because if you were talking about DEI 60 years ago, it was in a totally different place. It was not even thinkable to people like my grandparents' generation who lived through segregation and things that were so unheard of right now. So this growth mindset and the understanding and like welcoming of the ability to welcome change and to understand that you have the ability to grow, I think is so important with DEI. And not only for you, but to radiate that onto other people and be like, hey, like, let me help you change this. And like, it's so like change doesn't necessarily mean you were doing something wrong. It just means you could do it better.
Right. There's also an aspect of making mistakes and failing in growth mindset and just saying, okay, I didn't do it well, but I didn't do it well yet. I can still learn this. I can still, and I think with this topic, we're going to make mistakes. We are an organization of predominantly white women. We have some phenomenal members who are sisters of color, but as an organization of predominantly white women, we're gonna make some mistakes. But we call it failing forward. But I think everybody kind of has to give themselves the permission to step into it. And you may not get it exactly right, but with a growth mindset, you can get it right next time.
Yes, and that is horrifying. Like, it is scary to say that, like, you may make a mistake on an exam, or like when you're doing something minor, it doesn't matter. But I think as white women, with knowing our privilege, to make a mistake in DEI feels so detrimental because we care and because we understand how hurtful that can be, and clearly how detrimental that can be to the Black community and to minority communities everywhere. If we make one mistake, it's not going to make or break everything as long as we learn from it. If we say something wrong, but we understand what we did and we can learn from it, it's likely never going to happen again. And it's not like that's going to make or break the entire world as long as you recognize it. But if you continue to make these mistakes and you just sort of brush them off, that's more of that fixed mindset where DEI is never going to make a change.
Right. Such great concepts. You are worlds ahead of your time with wisdom on this. And I so appreciate you joining us today and sharing these thoughts. And we're so proud of the work that you're doing there. Not just you, but your whole committee and your chapter. And we're just really proud of the work you guys are doing. So I want to give our listeners and watchers a chance to check you out. Where can they find the University of Delaware, our chapter there, on social media or website or where's the best place to keep up with what you guys are doing?
So you can keep up with our Instagram at UD Tri Delta. Very simple. We also have our own Tri Delta website. I'm not sure what the link is. If you Google University of Delaware Tri Delta, it should come up. But we are there. We are here for you. You can also follow me individually on social media. I post a ton of DEI, a ton of other fun stuff. My ad on Instagram is @LaurenWhitman8.
Awesome. We will put all that in the info for people to check out. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
It was so great to have you, and best of luck on all of the work you guys have ahead of you. We look forward to seeing great things from our chapter at Delaware.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it.
Thanks.